Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We're now going to start the panel on Gujarat, rights of tribals and other traditional communities. But before I start, there's an attendance sheet that is circulating around. So please do fill in your details and give them to Pallav at the end. So we'll just start with the panel. Now, Gujarat has a statistically quite significant tribal population. We were just discussing in the morning, where the numbers vary in different reports, but it is about 14 to 15% of the population is tribal. But at the same time, there are very few listed scheduled areas under the 5th schedule. But Gujarat also, as does the rest of the country, have many traditional communities, including the traditional fisher folk community, which is mostly in the Kutch area of Gujarat. So in this panel, we have a very interesting mix of presentations. The first two presentations will be by Mr. Ambrish Mehta and Mr. Varun Mitra, both of which will focus on the land and forest rights of tribal populations. The third presentation will be made jointly by Kanchi Koli and Bharat Patel, and that will focus on the rights of the traditional fisher folk community. So to introduce the panelists, Mr. Ambrish Mehta, on my left, is a trustee and full-time activist at the Action Research in Community Health and Development in Gujarat, the ARCH, or also known as ARCH or ARCH Vadodara. Mr. Mehta has worked extensively on the implementation of the Forest Rights Act in the tribal districts of Gujarat, and he will be speaking on the status of land rights of tribals in Gujarat, a case for the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. Then we'll have Dr. Varun Mitra, who is the founder and director of the Liberty Institute, a non-profit independent public research and advocacy organization based in Delhi. Mr. Mitra is a commentator on current affairs on a range of issues, from economic development to conservation of wildlife, and from property rights of the poor and marginalized sections to intellectual property and access to healthcare, etc. He has written extensively in national and international newspapers and has been awarded for his contribution to international environmental policy debate. He will be speaking also on the Forest Rights Act and its impact on law, politics, and economics. Then we'll have the third presentation by Kanchi Koli and Bharat Patel. Kanchi Koli is an independent researcher, writer, and campaigner working on environment, forest, and biodiversity governance in India and their interface with trade and industrialization. She has individually and in teams with various organizations like Kalpavriksh and also Namati worked on these issues both at the grassroots level as well as been a part of national and international advocacy and research campaigns. Bharat Patel is a full-time activist and is the executive director of the Machhimar Adhikar Sangharsh Samiti. He's also an executive committee member of the District Coastal Management Committee and the National Fish Workers Forum. I've been fortunate to have a long association with both Kanchi and Bharat on some of the cases involving displacement and deprivation of the rights of the traditional fisher folk community in Gujarat. And they will be jointly presenting on land use, land grab, and environmental regulation in Mundra. So without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Mr. Mehta.
Thanks, Namita. And as he said, I have been working mainly in the tribal areas of Gujarat for past 30 years. Initially for the rehabilitation of tribal families affected by the Sada Sarovar project, Narmada project. So on that issue, I worked for about 15 years, and then other forest rights related issues. And for past 5 years, mainly concentrating on Forest Rights Act. So since now we have to talk from Meghalaya to Gujarat, I think before I start talking about Forest Rights Act, it would be a good thing to give you an idea of what the tribal areas of Gujarat are and what is their brief history of land ownership and forest ownership and other things. So coming to that, I don't have much of a academic background. Whatever I would be saying would be largely based on the discussions I had with the tribal elders and also following some of the government reports and examining some of them. So that is largely the source of the things which I will be telling, because working with these on these issues, working with these tribals on these issues gave us a lot of opportunities of discussing what happened in the past, what was the situation in the past, and that has also given us a key insights into what has been happening in this area. Coming to the tribal areas of Gujarat, we have many tribes from Bhils and Bilalas, Vasawas, Rathwas and others, but mainly the all tribal belt of Gujarat is located in the eastern part of the state. It is a narrow belt. It is surrounded by Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra. These are the three states which are surrounding this tribal belt. And none of them were directly under British rule. Historically, these areas were largely ruled by local kings or local kingdoms, largely Rajput kings. Mainly in one of Langs, for instance, it had a Bhil or Vasawa, they are local tribal kings, but otherwise largely ruled by Rajput kings. In all these areas, there were Jagirdars because for collection of land revenue, but most of these kingdoms have very close relations with British. Most of them had British residents stayed with them, and so land settlement process here was quite advanced. In all these areas, all the lands have been surveyed. All these surveys were carried out in 1920. They were supposed to be redone after 50 years. That has not happened. But in early 90s, these surveys were done, and land collection of land revenue was through each king had these many villages for this Jagirdar, and they were collecting tax revenues from this tribal. So tribals were technically legally tenants of that owner, or Jagirdar or Dumaldar, and many other systems were there. They were independent cultivators. Their land had been surveyed and they were given settlement title ownership also. Whatever land they were privately cultivating, not others. So individual land ownership and individual agriculture is being practiced throughout from the beginning. There was no communal agriculture. No communal agriculture in tribal areas of Gujarat, and if I am not mistaken, also not in Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and other states. So that was there. What was the system which was there under these Jagirdars was that although people would cultivate their own lands, they also were forced to supply labor to the Jagirdar on his own land, which was quite of a serfdom type of a system. So when this was abolished after independence, the first thing that happened after independence in this area was that these Jagirdars, these systems and Dumaldari systems, they were abolished, and all the families become title holders of the lands which they were cultivating. And many tribal elders say that this was the first air of freedom that they breathed. This was something, because going to the Jagirdar's land and work without any payment for continuously every year, year after year, was something that they considered it as serfdom, and they regretted it a lot. And that is why they were very happy that this system was abolished post-independence. Not only this has also some bearing on the land holding patterns. Because you were supposed to go to provide free labor, they never subdivided, and this labor has had to be based on the holdings. So they never subdivided their holdings. Although there are 5, 7, 8 families dependent on a holding, the holdings would be named or owned by only one person. The rest of the families would not, because so that it would reduce the amount of forced labor which they would have to give. So that was first thing that happened during that time. Under the princely states, forests were owned by the kings, and these are, I am talking about largely about the forest areas. Forests were owned by the kings, but local communities had a lot of say and a lot of control on using of the forest resources, even selling timber, wood and other things. Not great many restrictions were there. Britishers came out with this idea of nationalizing the forests. They never had this direct rule on the parts of Gujarat forests, but most of them had this, as I said, they had influences with the local kingdoms, So some sort of a forest management, forest working plan systems were put in place even before the independence in those areas. That had also come into being. What happened thereafter and during this period was that that after independence, these were they formally became reserve forests, and large chunks of lands were declared forest areas. What happened in between with Dang exception? One exception was Dang. Dang, Britishers were very much interested in Dang forest, which was near the Bombay, and they needed Dang teak very much. So although there was a tribal chief there, they had a special arrangement and they never ruled. So, but they had an understanding with the tribal chief that it would declare 50% of the land as reserve forest, and the Britishers would be free to take away all the timber from this area and pay some annual revenue to the tribal kings, which was pittance compared to the value of the teak that was being carried out. But they never, so this was going on. Afterwards, this so Dang had a special arrangement. Otherwise, it was all managed by the local kings under the influence of the British residents who were guiding them under for the forest management practices. What happened after independence? All these forest tracts which were lying with the tribal kings, they were vested into forest department right away, straight away. Most of the lands became forest lands. It was declared as reserve forests and some protected forests, but largely reserve forests. No settlement processes were done. 5 minutes, okay. So forest rights, you can continue. So this happened, and they lost. So forest, they immediately lost. Whatever individual lands were there, immediately lost. They had no rights, no settlement process for them. Many areas, people were cultivating lands before this thing came, but they were also declared reserve forests, and people were declared as encroachers of the land. What has happened thereafter is that people lost land in development projects. So large lands, most of the villages, in forested area, most of the villages, individual land ownership is very little. 8 to 10% of the land would be covered under individual agricultural ownership. Rest all is forest lands owned by forest department. So people with increasing population, and with there is no other means of avenue, and they had no rights over forest produce. Forest deforestation that happened in Gujarat afterwards, deforestation that happened in Gujarat was largely by at the edges of forest department in the name of scientific forestry management. What happened? That all these forests were there. Britishers were taking only the mature teaks for their shipbuilding. Gujarat Forest Department and Indian Forest Department, Foreign Service, they said that forests must serve the industrial needs, wood requirement of the industry. So what they did during 60s and 80s was that they came out with this idea of plantation circles, where the most productive mixed forests were clearly felled, risen to the ground, all across, all the trees were cut. It is not just mature teaks or mature trees. All trees were removed, even the roots were extracted. And the idea was that once this area is cleared, all of this unnecessary vegetation, they would raise fast-growing teak plantations on this area. So that was the plan. So that the biggest deforestation that happened in Gujarat happened not because of illegal felling, happened not because of the population growth, not because of the non-interest of the tribals, or unscientific attitudes of the tribals, but happened because the forests were owned by forest department, and they documented this on large scale. That had happened in those areas. So people had no rights over the forests. They had very little control over the land. They were cultivating forest lands to meet the meager existence, but they were treated as encroachers, so always under the threat of being removed. Forest department would always pounce upon them. And this is the situation where the environment was also at a loss, and tribals also did not have much to bank upon. In this context, the Forest Rights Act came. People fought for them. We were part of that campaign. And forest rights gives basically rights over the lands which they are cultivating. Ownership rights, not ownership rights, but right to cultivate. And inherited rights continuously. They cannot sell this land, but they would be allowed to cultivate this land all across. And it also gives rights to forest produce, including bamboo. So they have 100% ownership of bamboo and all other minor forest produces. And they also have the right to manage forests as community forest resources. So we have been part of the groups that are active for the proper implementation of this act. We are very actively involved in the struggle about this. State government, although very friendly, capital friendly, is not at all interested in implementation of this act. And so we have been fighting an uphill battle against for the proper implementation. About 182,000 claims were filed. Of these, only 20,000 were approved and rest all were rejected. And state government had claimed that all these are bogus claims. And we filed a PIL in the Gujarat High Court. We got a judgment in May 2030, which has said that all these claims, rejected claims, are to be reviewed again. And all the evidences which the government did not consider must be taken into account. So these things are going on. And one thing.
What is the name of the case?
PIL, ARCH Youth Fine. I would give you PIL number and everything I would give you. So judgment is also 80-page judgment is there. It's a good judgment. One thing I would like to point out that this enthusiasm now the people have. When the FRA came, because all these years people also behaved not very constructively towards the environment because they did not own anything. They had no right over access to that. So their attitude towards forests was also very, very not in the interest of the environment, that we can say. Once the rights came, once the FRA came, when the FRA came and people felt that they would be owners of bamboo and they would be owners of the field which they own, they immediately started not only improving their land, building farm barns and other things of which the land that they owned, but also protecting and regenerating the forests. In many areas, they on their own formed forest protection committees and forest regeneration committees. They took steps on their own without plantation, without going for any expansion things. They were taking up distance. Then the government rejected all these claims. So there was a sort of a down. Okay, if government is not giving our land, how can we think that it would give us forests? So there is no point preserving it and spending a lot of time doing this. But let us do, so they reverted back. Now after the High Court judgment, again there is some hope that these rights would be recognized. So people are now very, very enthused about not only protecting the forests and improving their soils. Many individual farmers are also now, because on their land, bamboo grown and on their own lands, which are privately being cultivated. Initially, before this, it belonged to forest department, so they had no incentive to grow bamboo. Now, because they own this land and all the produce of this land, they are thinking in a big way of going for bamboo cultivation, teak cultivation, and other forest reproduction. So overall, the whole scenario of that area can change in next 5 to 10 months, provided these things go ahead. Right now, it's still a struggle because we don't know. We are hopeful that we would get something, but we don't know how far it would go. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. I must say that we rarely hear any positive stories about the protection of the rights of tribals and marginalized communities. So